Hello and welcome to PowerBuilder TV. In this webinar, we will look at migrating sometimes connected PowerBuilder apps with Appeon. Today's presenter, Ryan Story, is a developer with Rax Inc., which develops software serving the petroleum distribution industry. Ryan began working with PowerBuilder in 2012 and has been working with Appeon Mobile since the first beta period. With the help of Appeon, Rax has migrated 6 PowerBuilder applications to Appeon that allows expansion to the field from Rax's primary back-office management system. Rax currently has 2 applications using Appeon in production, with the other 4 in beta. Welcome, Ryan.
Hello. Okay, so like Liz said, my name is Ryan Story. I'm a developer with Rax. So we've been doing some stuff here, and I'm going to move this guy away. That's useless to you guys. To some PowerBuilder apps into Appeon. The most stuff that I work on is with the mobile side, so moving apps to iOS or Android, because we had a lot of handheld stuff or stuff that was in the field that we wanted to move to some new technology. So the goals that we had when we started out on the project were to move away from some old Pocket Builder apps that we had, and also a desktop app that we were running on notebooks or netbooks, the little guys that were popular a couple years ago, and we wanted to move it to some modern hardware like iPads and tablets and all the good stuff. So we wanted to give the people what they wanted. Everybody had been asking about tablets. They're pretty popular now, so we wanted to be able to offer our software on that. And we want to be able to support multiple platforms because of the effort it takes to support all of them. It was easy with Appeon because we could just take our code that we were using on Windows and push it over to iOS and Android apps. So what I was going to talk about today is pretty much, if anybody was at the Charlotte user conference, I gave the same presentation, so I'm just going to do that when I can. There shouldn't be too many changes, but we'll see how much I remember, how much I think of. So the first little bit is offline capability and challenges. Our applications, we required them all to be offline capable, so they wouldn't need an internet connection. So there's some things that we had to do and some challenges that go along with that. The other part was a modern user interface. So PowerBuilder apps, most of the time they're enterprise stuff, so if people don't really care about the looks too much, but once you put it on nice new hardware and people are downloading apps every day, they expect them to look a certain way. So we wanted to make sure that our app was kind of going to be in the same league as everybody else's that you could find on the App Store. The other side, or the last part, was a native app deployment and some other mobile technologies. So that I'll talk about a little bit more, but basically we wanted it to be familiar with the user and be able to leverage some of the technology that comes along with having a mobile device. So first with the offline app is that our applications are all used out in the field, the stuff that we are migrating to the mobile side. And even though almost everybody who has a smartphone can have a hotspot, a lot of our customers, they're either in areas that don't have a lot of good cell coverage, or they're just in warehouses or some other industrial areas that don't really aren't conducive to having good internet. So we wanted to be able for them to have the whole experience of the application without having the internet, and be able to only use or only need the internet when they need to do some important stuff like synchronization. So that's the only time that our apps require the internet, is when we sync back to the main database that we're using. So when you do sync, it does take resources, not only in the programming side, but I mean it takes a lot to maintain, or a decent amount to maintain, because there are issues that come up that you don't really foresee or that don't happen when you're not trying to move around subsets of data. So that one was a challenge that we have, mostly just little things that pop up. The other part is that they don't always have most current data. So for things that change quickly, our applications are dealing with inventory is pretty much the stuff, or is what changes the most for our applications. So they go in, and it's just a training issue that has to be done with the customers, that lets them know that the information that they're seeing is a subset or a snapshot, not necessarily live. So that is a downside of it, but it does give us more flexibility when what we're doing, to kind of not be tethered to the world or to the internet. For us, with Appeon, you can use SQLite or Ultralite, and we do SQL Anywhere for our main database for the back office side of our application or our software. So we used Ultralite because we had already been using, with our netbook, we had a sales application, and we were already using SQL Anywhere and Mobilink, which is the sync process for SQL Anywhere, to do that. So it was an easy switch to go to Ultralite because there's not many differences. The whole framework can stay the same. Where you do come up with differences with Ultralite is that it is a small database, or it's kind of a, I don't know the good technical word, but it doesn't have as many features as a SQL Anywhere database. So we did run into a few problems with that because of how we were handling stuff internally, with how we were doing some, for example, if our sales application, it was tailored to fit a salesman. So the salesman would only see the data that, or the customers that he had, and he would only be able to manage those customers. So if the salesman leaves, or they decide to reassign devices, then you have to run into a problem where you have to either put a new database on or kind of reset it. So we were doing a process where we reset the database through through a certain way with SQL Anywhere, but that doesn't work with Ultralite, so we had to find a new way to handle that scenario. So there's a few things that has changed. And a good thing is that there's a lot of information and a lot of good apps out there that you can look at to try to draw some inspiration from. And even there's white papers that get put out about the user experience. So one of the big ones that we changed to was a flat user interface. That's been pretty common even in a lot of the desktop hardware or desktop software now. Another one was, or another note that I read when I did research for the user interface was, I think it's somebody from Apple put out one about how they changed the way people interact. When the first tablets came out, or touch screens, everything looked like a button that was a button, and that makes sense because we're used to pushing buttons, but now we've been conditioned to just start tapping screens, so they don't really have to make buttons look like physical buttons. So that's one change that we made in our application, is to kind of adopt that way, the kind of an Apple style, or even the modern tablet style with the touch screen. Another one was getting rid of drop-down menus. They're not really easy to manipulate, or we didn't think they were easy to manipulate on a touchscreen device. And then some good color choices. So using color or the absence of color in some of them. Our sales application takes more of the simplistic design, like the new Apple stuff does, where it's shades of gray and white and blue. So I'll show you real quick what we do for our UI. If I can get my stuff over here. So this is from an iPad. I'm just typing it in, running the application on the iPad. This is our sales application. So what happens is our customers, they have a sales force, and they can assign each sales rep a device. And as I mentioned earlier, the sales rep only gets that subset of their customers, which is good because then it eliminates the issues that you have when people can see other people's accounts. So this is like a home screen though. So basically it's still a tabbed view, just like you have a tab controller or something, but we changed the look and put the tab selections on the bottom, or the screen selections, and kind of changed the way we did them. So kind of our administrative functions, settings, and about the application, I put all the way on the right, and the stuff that they're doing all day, or more commonly on the left here. So this is kind of a home screen, or kind of a launch pad for them to get some quick view of. So like I said, the way that we decided to go, at least for this one, was kind of some grayish or shades of gray. And then the buttons, we followed along with kind of Apple's doing with making them the blue color. So you can see though, everything in blue here is something you can touch, or that's a button. So nothing looks like a button, there's no outlines or anything, but because it's blue and because our users are used to tapping things like that, and it's something that they can, or they understand as being a button. So we give them some basic information. Another screen that kind of highlights some of it is our customer screen. I'm going to tap it on the iPad. So this is a screen where they can see all their customers. And I said I didn't like drop-down menu boxes, and we got a few up there, but it's kind of some space saving. So I guess you got to kind of weigh what you're doing. But we've got list boxes, or actually just data windows for the customer list. But what we did is that we have some functions that they can, or that the sales rep can do for each customer. So we put those all on the side, and this is basically, it acts just like a tab controller would, or tab view control. Because basically all we're doing is we're loading up stuff. So for example, if we have this location selected, we give them some basic information, and then they have all these functions that they can perform. But when they pick any of these functions, so if we go to the order and the quote, we keep all on the left the same, because this is how they're navigating. And we also give them some basic information so they can see it. For example, the balance on the phone throughout everything. So we're just loading up different views for them to see, just like it would be on a tab type control. So you can see that we did use different colors here. This one's the busiest window that I've made, or busiest screen that I've had, just because there's so much going on. And that's one of the challenges on these tablets, is trying to fit everything you need into kind of confined space. But some of the limitations is, so I said my earlier buttons didn't look like buttons. So these are buttons on the data window, and I'm not smart enough of a guy to know or find a way to get rid of the outline on a data window. But so that's why those are there, and the same thing for down here. And I think these are, I don't know what I've got there. I think I highlighted them because we wanted some consistency within the actual screen if we couldn't get consistency across the whole app. So these screens that you're seeing are all user objects. So I load them up whenever we select something, which is kind of the part about moving to the tablets, is that you don't have as much memory as you do on a desktop device or even a laptop. So you have to be a little bit careful. So Appeon has a lot of functions to figure out if you're running out of memory. But I have found that as long as I don't go too crazy and don't open up a ton of stuff, it works out okay. So that's what all these are. Everything on here is a user object. The home screen, that display was a user object. So it makes it easy to move things around. Another one, or I guess, so the order quote, this little piece up here. So this I just made out of a picture, or I made 2 pictures actually, and to kind of make my own button. So PowerBuilder didn't have a button like this, but it was easy enough to do just making a picture. So if they tap on it, it'll switch it to quote, so they can save whatever they're putting in here in their cart as a quote or an order. So that's kind of an example of using some other resources to make the user interface more modern when it's kind of limited by what you have with PowerBuilder. The other one is trying to maintain some closeness to the UI guidelines or that you see on a lot of the apps and a lot of the mainframe stuff, or the system applications on devices. So if you notice, I have edit buttons at the top right for contacts where I'm adding stuff. I put a plus sign or an add button up here. So add and edit, and the done button would show up when they were finished. So just trying to follow along with what is the most common practices, at least at the moment, with the application. Another one I'll show you is, so if you price an item, there's a time when people usually want to delete the item. So if we edit, we get the delete button up here, which follows along with what you usually see in the application. So that's kind of what the modern user interface is about, is just trying to mimic what's out there. So because everybody has or most everybody has a touchscreen or a tablet or a phone of some sort, and a lot of the applications, they change quickly in the way they look, but everybody kind of seems to follow somewhat of a standard, or even if the standard changes every month, at least it's being propagated. And you can find, and even in your daily use, you can find the apps that you like the most or the most pleasing aesthetically. So trying to follow that is kind of what we're shooting for, because we want the user to just think of this as another app that they get off the App Store, and not as some enterprise application that carries with it a lot of training. So with that being said, if you make the user interface well, it works just as apps do. A lot of apps these days, they give you a few pointers when you start out, but the overall theme is that you can't get into too much trouble unless you really know you're getting into trouble. So the user can tap around everywhere, do a lot of things, and kind of play around with it to learn how it works without causing issues. So even though some apps do have user manuals, but the most common thing nowadays, at least for me, unless they get really technical, there's not really a need for a big user manual. They give you a couple pointers, and then it's kind of trial and error after that, or not trial and error, because as long as the user interface is designed well, they should be able to know or see the flow of everything so they can access stuff. Another part, so we moved this application over last year, or early last year, or we finished moving it over early last year, I'd say, to the iPad. One of the things that we had in the previous application was a lot of right-click menus. And so even though right-click menus don't work on tablets, it was a good way to get rid of those, because those are kind of hidden functionality. Even people who were using netbooks or tablets, or not tablets, laptops, they still didn't know that the right-click menus were there, because they'd have to go to the user manual to see that. So we kind of brought everything to the front, put it all out there so it's easy to see and easy to use. So that was one of the big goals of moving to a more modern interface. So the next one I was going to talk about is our native deployment. I'll bring that back up. So native deployment, what I mean by that is, so Appeon gives you a few different ways of pushing out the application. There's the Appeon Workspace, which is an app from, or well, it's two parts, I guess. There's an app from Appeon where you can put in the code for, or the URL for the app once you, that is on a server that either you or your customer has. And it loads it up there in kind of like a window view. And actually, we can, instead of me just blabbering on about it, I can show you here. So what happens is that you're able to add a lot of apps in here. So you could have kind of I don't know what you'd call it, like a little library of apps that you could access. So this is probably this is the way I test things because it's quick and pretty painless once you get the Appeon Workspace app put on there. The bad part about it is this part isn't really customized. So we're racked, but I mean, there's a lot of stuff for Appeon, and there's even, you know, these little pictures, which are good to know, but we like to customize it. So there is a way to customize the Appeon Workspace, and you would push it out as a native application yourself. So you could do that through the App Store. There's even ways to do it for the enterprise, and you could customize a lot of what you see. The other part, which is the one that we chose to do, was to just package up the app by itself as just a plain iOS or Android app and push it out to those respective app stores. The reason being is the app is just one icon, so there's no, you don't tap into it and get 5 apps to choose from. The other part is that you download it from the App Store, so that's really familiar with all of our users because everybody who goes to play Angry Birds or whatever is going to the App Store to download it. So it's simple for them to understand, and there's no question about it. They don't have any doubts or anything about where it's coming from. So I'll bring up my slide again. So that's the advantages that the user's familiar with. The other one is it allows us to customize things. So I'll talk about in a minute what we can customize when we do a native deployment. But we have access to kind of some underlying stuff that we can do in Objective-C or for iOS or for some stuff when we develop in Android. You can actually access some of the lower level or some of the functionality that other people have built for those platforms in addition to using all the good stuff that Appeon gave us by being able to port over all that PowerBuilder code. The disadvantages, at least for iOS, is that there is an approval process. So Apple reviews every app that gets submitted to the App Store, and it usually runs, the quickest I've ever had was about 7 days. I ran pretty good at about 10 days. Some people say it's 4 to 10, but it changes based on a few things, how busy they are, I think. For Android, there is no approval process, so it's pretty straightforward for Android. And even for Apple, there is a way that you don't have to go through the App Store. If you sign on as an enterprise developer, you can actually build apps that are going to be in-house. They don't have to go to the App Store, and they don't have to get approved. So that's kind of a way to, there's 2 different paths you can take for Apple. For the developer, it takes a little bit more time. You have to package up the app with Appeon, and then you have to open it up, and at least for the Apple side, you have to unzip a few things and move a few files around, and then there is some other work to be done because you have to sign up with Apple to be a developer. So you have to get some product signing stuff taken care of and put in some details. So I wouldn't say it takes a lot of time, but it does take more time than just pushing out an update with Appeon Workspace. Because with Appeon Workspace, you get it done once, then all you're doing is pushing out updates from within PowerBuilder, and that's really quick. So it takes more time in comparison to that. The other side is cost. The last time I was looking at it, Google charges a whopping $25 to put apps in the App Store or the Play Store for Google or Android devices. Apple charges $99 a year to put apps in the App Store. So that's kind of a difference there. just something else. The developer program, actually Apple just changed how they did it, and you used to not be able to test apps on actual devices unless you were a registered developer. But now they've changed it to where you can. So you can actually, if you want to give it a shot, see how hard it is before you sign up for the whole thing. You can actually go into Xcode or the Apple development environment and try it out, or try kind of your app on the iPad or any device before you go through paying for it. So we really like the way of doing native deployment, like I said, just because it let us customize a few things that we wanted to. The user is really familiar, and there's no really questions about what's going on or where the app is coming from. So that's what we were doing for that. So the last part is kind of the last little bit is mobile technologies. So we have these awesome little devices that we are putting in the hands of all these guys, and we're putting our software on there. And there's a lot of stuff that the devices can do that laptops either couldn't do or couldn't do very easily. So one of them is a thing called URL scheme. So this is kind of a standard that's been set with the app or the device manufacturers or software, I guess, either iOS or Android, where you can actually call a URL and it'll open up, or call something to happen in another app. So the biggest one that I'll show you here is that we can access kind of the maps or the navigation side for a device. So this is back in my little sales application. So we have this location selected. It's in Newark, Arkansas. So you see I have a little thing up at the top right that says get directions. So I didn't program anything in PowerBuilder to find out where this guy is, where I'm at. Well, take that back. I figured out where I'm at. So Appeon gives you a function. So I put in 8 lines of code or 10 lines of code to figure out a GPS position for me. And I converted that, or sent that, packaged it up as a URL, and called it. And so that sends me, once I hit get directions, that URL scheme that I built that had a position of where I'm at and a position of where I wanted to go, it opens up the map application and it routes it. So with only a little bit of code in PowerBuilder, with the help of Appeon, I was able to add some mapping functionality to the app. We'll see. So, of course, no one knows where Newark, Arkansas is. But, let's see. I could be a liar. I think I know why. Yeah. But there's other ways you can do it too. For example, I don't have it enabled this app, but for this phone number up here, and mainly because it was an iPad, but if this was an iPhone or an Android application on a phone, I could have this phone number be able to be clicked, and so there's a URL scheme that you can write. That's just a line, a one-line little URL or piece of code, and it'll open up and makes a phone call. So it'll ask the user if they want to make the phone call, but it lets them straight from the app without copying or writing down a phone number, just dial the phone. So the URL schemes are a big one. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of stuff, almost all the big apps have a URL scheme. So you can find it either on their site, and then if you want to access the system functions that can be accessed with the URL scheme, if you go to that operating system site for Apple or Android, you can get a whole list of them there. The other one, device notifications. So this is something that's not, or that Appeon does support, but you can only add apps or add notifications to the device while you're in the app. So what I wanted to do was be able to notify users or have our customers be able to notify their users from within the app or outside of the app for things and have that show up on their devices. So device notifications be anything. It's when you get all the notifications telling you haven't played Angry Birds enough lately, all of that stuff, or when you got a new email or a new text message. So that's kind of the functionality that we were going for. So they appear in a lot of different ways based on kind of what you're doing, but we'll show you one here. So the system that I'm using, and it made it really easy, was Parse. This is parse.com, and they kind of have a database in the cloud, I guess, for you to use. And so they have SDKs built for a lot of different platforms, and iOS and Android are those platforms. So what happened is I created my little app here in Parse, and then because I am doing a native deployment, I was able to tie in the code that they have, which is Objective-C for iOS or Apple stuff. So I tied in that code to my app, and there's a few keys that get put in so it knows who is calling back to the mothership. But basically, what I can do then is, in addition to push notifications, I'm actually able to see information about my users. So this is kind of a modern thing that a lot of the apps nowadays have, and it's tied in. So I got it tied into a PowerBuilder app because we're using Appeon to push it over. So I'm going to copy the user that I am. So I can send out a notification to me and not anybody else. Make sure you get copied that. But this all, these guys give you a blank project that you can see all the data in. You can see I did a test one earlier this morning. But so it's just a lot of copy and pasting. There's not really a lot of stuff to do. This part of it, adding this type of functionality, there's stuff that you have to do on the Apple side, but I probably spend a couple hours getting it done, and then a couple hours trying to test it out. So it's easy to do, and since this type of language is so popular, either Objective-C or Java and Android, is that you find a lot of examples. So if you get stuck, there's 1,000 16-year-olds who are ready to tell you where you messed up. So you just have to go Google. So we'll put in a message here, and we'll do TV. So I'll move this over here, and I'll send it. Let me get this going. So then we get a device notifications right on the app. So if we tap that, it would open the app. We're already in the app, so it wouldn't do anything. But it also shows the, if we look down here, VS Mobile is the app, and it increments the badge counter, so or the badge on there. So that's the functionality. There's not a direct way or that you can do it, but if you do a native deployment, you can add in the code and work it from there. The other side that I had mentioned on there was GPS capability. So you can access the GPS through functions that Appeon gives you, so you got a lot of leverage or ways to do stuff there. The other one that we just did is we had a project, or we have a project, where we wanted to be able to scan or use a barcode scanner with a device. So we were testing with an iPad, and an iPad doesn't have a barcode scanner unless you use a camera, which is not really good to use when you're out in the field some places, unless it's just like a one-off. So we bought a barcode scanner that plugs into the bottom of an iPad, so it's another device or piece of hardware, and it wasn't Bluetooth or anything, so we couldn't use the normal stuff where you could, the operating system or the app could just see it as another keyboard. We could only do it through code to get the barcodes. So we were able to do that, so we pushed over the app with Appeon, and it was we did a native deployment with it. So what that meant was that we could actually code in. For this example, we were on the Apple side, so with Objective-C, we were able to code in all the stuff to get barcodes from the barcode scanner. And as a roundabout way to get stuff into PowerBuilder from Objective-C, we wrote stuff to files and then had a timer event in PowerBuilder for when the user was on this certain part of the application. So if the user was in a spot where he needed to, or he or she needed to scan barcodes, a timer went off and it would look in this file to try to see if any barcodes. So we wrote the barcodes in Objective-C to a file, read the file from PowerBuilder. So it's a roundabout way, but it kind of shows that you can really do a lot of stuff moving these apps over from PowerBuilder with Appeon, as long as you get a little creative. This was a lot about offline stuff, so there's challenges with any syncing application, like I mentioned right in the beginning, just because of how everything works. At least that I found, it takes more effort, but really it's not that hard, and Appeon makes it pretty easy. So it's just pretty straightforward. There's no more configuring to do than you have to do for a normal app for Appeon, and at least for us, we liked it because we got the added benefit of not having to have an internet connection. The other upside to having an offline app, and I guess the same could be said if you cached a lot of stuff, but it works fast because everything's on the device, the database is on the device, so everything's right there ready to be used. So really the only slowdowns that you have are when you're starting to get memory intensive. So if you're really hitting the database, or if you had a lot of user objects open or any objects open, it's going to slow it down. But as far as being able to access the data, it's really fast and you're not relying on the internet connection. So that's why we chose it to be used. So that's kind of what I had to say. It's kind of a mix of things in there, a little bit of offline and some other stuff, but that's pretty much it. So if anybody had any questions, I don't know, Liz.